Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Spratt. I work for Sports Info Solutions, and I'm joined, as always, by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. Before we get started today, I wanted to plug something, which is that on footballoutsiders.com right now, you can find a new premium charting subscription. Aaron, could you talk a little bit about what people that subscribe to that can actually access now?
Actually, absolutely. We are really excited to finally be offering this, and I think we hinted at it in the last podcast, but this is really good stuff. So it's actually one of two new premium products that we are doing on Football Outsiders. The premium charting data is going to bring you a selection of our charting stats for the entire season, and it's actually going to be updated on a weekly basis starting after week 2. So what you get right now is just the 2015 numbers. And this is from the Sports Info Solutions charting. You get broken tackles by both offense and defense, defensive player pressures, pressure rate by team, play action rate, both offense and defense for those, receiver drops, and all of our cornerback charting metrics. And we're going to update those every week during the season. So you're actually going to be able to have these stats during the season every week starting next week. And the 2015 data is there now. And it's $25, and that gets you all this data through next June.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff. It's a lot of the same stats that we sometimes cite on this show, and it's the kind of goodies that go into a lot of the advanced statistics that, Aaron, you're doing on Football Outsiders. We're working with here at Sports Info Solutions. So I think it's definitely worth checking out for everyone who's a fan and for all the fantasy players out there that want to get a little bit of an edge on their competition.
And, of course, speaking of fantasy players, I would be remiss if I did not mention our other new premium product, which is also in conjunction with you guys. And that is that we now offer weekly fantasy projections, which is something people have been asking us for years. And they are now done, created mostly with Sports Info Solutions data, with some help from us and DVOA. And that subscription costs $20 for the season, and you get weekly fantasy projections every week for the 6 main positions, the quote-unquote skill players and kickers and defense. So, premium charting data, $25. Weekly fantasy projections, $20. Lots of good stuff. And also having this stuff quicker will also allow us to eventually do things like account for receiver drops in DVOA, which will be a really nice addition when the time comes that I can program that in. And we're really excited about all this. So everybody who enjoys this podcast will probably also enjoy that data.
For sure. So check out footballoutsiders.com for all of that really cool stuff. But this is a podcast, so Aaron and I better talk about what happened in week 1 of the NFL this season. Aaron, I think at least we try to be on brand for this podcast, is to be a little bit smarter about football in our analysis that we're doing about it. So because of that, let's hold off about talking about how the 49ers and Eagles are clearly the best teams in football until the second segment of the show today, if that works for you.
That works. Let's hold off on that.
Okay, so then let's start by first talking about the Patriots, who had a big and I think somewhat surprising win in Arizona in week 1. The real challenge was that basically they were playing with Jimmy Garoppolo, a new quarterback starting for Brady while he's suspended, playing without Rob Gronkowski, and then playing on the road against one of the presumed best teams in the league. I know Arizona was one of the top 3 teams in projected DVOA in the preseason projections for Football Outsiders. Let's start by talking about Garoppolo.
They were the number 2 team with Brady suspended.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, obviously a really tough spot for a quarterback to make his first career start. But I thought that Garoppolo really passed the eye test, looked very comfortable, even against some of the pressure situations that he was put in. I was curious what your thoughts about what you saw and then what maybe some of the stats like DYAR thought of his performance.
Yeah, I was unbelievably impressed, of course, excited as a Patriots fan. I kind of was sitting there going, I can't believe this is happening. They should not be winning this. And yet they did. It was weird because, of course, I picked Arizona to win the Super Bowl. So I'm like, oh, this is fabulous and also terrible at the same time for my personal emotions. And then I was surprised when we ran the numbers, and there were a number of games this week in which the losing team actually ended up with a higher rating than the winning team. And that's not a surprise, especially when you have so many close games, because there'll be a lot of one-point games where, because of fumble luck or special teams or just random, just which how many plays did you put together in a row, our ratings will end up with the losing team a little bit ahead of the winning team, but it was a pretty big gap. Then you go and you look, and it's really interesting. The Patriots did this all with 3rd and long conversions. The Cardinals actually gained more yards per play than the Patriots. But more importantly, the Cardinals had a 51% success rate on downs, and the Patriots were at 39%. But when you break that down, the Patriots, 32% successful on first down, 30% on second down, 63% on third down. They converted all kinds of ridiculous third downs. And while that's a good thing, it's not necessarily as easy to carry over into the future as the converting first and second. When they do things like LeGarrette Blount running 13 yards on 3rd and 11, or Garoppolo completing a pass to Amendola on 3rd and 15. Edelman had a 3rd and 10 conversion. Mitchell, the rookie, had a 3rd and 7 conversion. It was they just converted all the third downs, and that's how they won the game.
So for someone like me that, I'm definitely into the Football Outsider stats, but maybe I'm not 100% up on what everything is. When I see that the Patriots were 26th in DVOA and the Cardinals were 13th, I'm like, how can that be? But I think basically what you're saying is, A, that's sort of a 1 week sort of sample before the defensive adjustments get thrown in. And 2, even though the Patriots won the game, it's those third down conversion opportunities that sort of benefited them but aren't necessarily predictive going forward.
Right, and that's the thing about is that DVOA, we're not measuring exactly how good every team played. We're trying to measure how good they are. I talk about this in a sort of a weird way, but the idea of Platonic philosophy, that there's an ideal is somewhere in the universe that represents the ideal version of a thing. What DVOA is trying to do is measure the ideal version of what is Arizona and what is New England based on the data that we have so far. Like, how good are they really?
Sure.
And so while the Patriots won that game, the Cardinals did more things in the game that would suggest that they would win more games going forward than the Patriots did. With the asterisk, of course, that the Patriots are getting a better quarterback in 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, the way I like to think about it is, imagine these two teams played each other 1,000 times with that same sort of production on an individual play basis. If the Cardinals are successful 51% of the time on their plays, the Pats 39%, there will be games where the Pats convert those long third downs, or where there'll be a missed field goal at an inopportune time for the Cardinals.
Right, where Catanzaro misses the field goal at the end.
But if you play them enough times, you would recognize that the Cardinals had the better production in that one set of circumstances. So I think that totally makes sense.
But I still think, DVOA aside, you come away from that game feeling very good if you're a Patriots fan, which I am, because the next 3 games are against lesser opponents and they are all at home. And you feel good about Garoppolo. I feel good about Garoppolo. And the chances that this team feels very strong now that this team is going to come out of this stretch 3-1. Maybe 4-0, more likely 3-1. They probably, the random chance, they probably lose one of these games. But I really doubt now that they lose 2 of these games.
But this doesn't do much to dampen your opinion about the Cardinals and their potential success, does it?
No, and that's why we do, on the site, we do 2 different ratings. We do DVOA, and then we do Dave, which is an obnoxious name, which was caused by people saying to me early on in Football Outsiders, like, why do your stats have such complicated names? And I said, it's not like we're going to go name a stat Dave or something. And so then I did.
Of course.
But Dave is the combination of the preseason projection with the performance so far. And so that gives you a really better idea of how good teams are, because the fact is that 1 week is still just 1 week. We know more after week 1 than we do after any other week, because it's the first week where we see the true, importance of scheme changes, because teams played vanilla in the preseason. We get a better idea of player usage. We get a better idea of how certain groups of teammates will work together, but it's still just 1 week. So it's also important to realize how well these teams played last year and what we thought of them going into the season based on the personnel and the coaching. And we thought that both of these teams were really, really good. So both of these teams come out of this close game, they're probably even better than they looked, because usually the Cardinals won't have to face the Patriots and the Patriots won't have to face the Cardinals.
And that's something DVOA is going to pick up on when the defensive adjustments get started to factor in, right? Which happens in how many weeks?
We gradually phase them in beginning after week 4.
Okay.
And the other is, of course, it will take this into account as the season moves forward, because the teams that are not as good but played each other in week 1 will gradually start losing to better teams, and the better teams who played each other in week 1 will gradually start beating lesser teams, right? So Arizona is not going to lose every game because most of the teams they play are not as good as the Patriots. And the Philadelphia Eagles are not going to win every game because every team they play is not as bad as the Cleveland Browns.
Thank you for that transition, Aaron, because that is exactly what I wanted to talk about. I lasted 10 minutes, so that's pretty good. But anyway, Eagles and 49ers, both big wins in week 1, both played probably pretty bad teams in week 1. Let's actually talk about the 49ers first, because if I can remember this correctly, we were sitting here a year ago, more or less to the day, discussing how the 49ers had surprisingly beat the Minnesota Vikings in week 1 last year by another substantial margin. And we were debating whether or not we thought that we had missed on either of those teams in our preseason analysis. When the year played itself out, it turns out that no, we were pretty much right on, that the 49ers were bad and the Vikings were good. What do you make of this circumstance? Have we potentially underrated the 49ers, or was this just another weird kind of game that happens sometimes?
I think that it is unlikely that we underrated the 49ers, but I wonder about the Rams.
And to be clear, we didn't rate the Rams, or you guys didn't rate the Rams that good in the first place.
No, we did, though. The DVOA projections had them as a slightly above average team, but because they play such a tough schedule, it didn't have them going to the playoffs.
That makes sense,
but
yes.
We had their defenses like a top 5 defense. If you give up 28 points to San Francisco, certainly on that night, you are not a top 5 defense, and that defensive line that is supposed to be so great just disappeared.
It did. I mean, speaking of that specifically, the 49ers offensive line allowed just 5% of their dropbacks to get pressure. And, I mean, that was top 5 in the league this week, not what you would expect facing what is supposed to be one of the best defensive fronts in the game.
Right, and the other thing I worry about with the Rams, first of all, the defensive front didn't show up, and that is the strength of the team. The other is they just keep going through offensive coordinators who do the same stuff. Like, maybe we can't blame the coordinators, maybe we need to blame the talent. Because, it's all short passes, and we thought Brian Schottenheimer couldn't, do long passes, and then they replaced him with some other guy, and then that guy, it's all short passes, and then they replaced him with Boris, that's the current guy. I think his name is Rob Boris, that's the current offensive coordinator, and it's all short passes. There's like a couple of deep passes to Kenny Britton. Otherwise, everything is within like 6 yards of the line of scrimmage. So, of course, you're telling the other defense to come up and play you in the box, which is not a good thing when your offense is supposed to be built around your running back.
Right. And you could tell, I mean, Gurley was getting hit in the backfield constantly. He really didn't have much of a chance in that game.
No, and it's not, they've got to stretch the field. They need a more well-rounded offense. And I think the biggest problem is they're building things for Tavon Austin. Tavon Austin is a slot receiver / gimmick player, and probably a very good one. But you can't make that guy the entire focus of your offense. The Packers tried that last year with Randall Cobb, and you saw that they missed. You saw how much that they missed him. And
missed Jordy Nelson. Yeah,
and they missed Jordy Nelson. Because Cobb couldn't be the main focus of the offense. Well, Tavon Austin can't be either. But there's no Jordy Nelson around here, and also the quarterback is not Aaron Rodgers. Far from it. So everything is like runs and 3-yard screen passes, and nothing goes anywhere.
You're probably not going to have to convince me very much, or really much anyone listening to this, that the Rams' offense is not very good and it's not very creative. But the other side of the ball, I think, is still a little bit interesting. And I think we've talked about this before, but Chip Kelly's philosophy of running an up-tempo game, to me, this is sort of a perfect example of one way that it can definitely work, which is if you're playing at a fast pace, the defensive line, the defensive ends who are rushing every play, they can get tired. And is it possible that it's that type of scheme, that type of approach could be particularly effective both here and in the future? Because, I mean, Blaine Gabbert, great. He was terrible at the start of his career. He's very athletic. He brings a dimension to the game that for the 49ers that Chip did not have with Sam Bradford in Philadelphia, and one that might, in my mind, be important for a team trying to move so quickly. What are your thoughts on that pace of play approach?
It is interesting. The situation neutral pace, obviously, we're only talking 1 week here, but San Francisco is like gobs and gobs ahead of the rest of the league, and even like 2 or 3 seconds ahead of the fastest Eagles Chip Kelly team. And the joke we all made in the offseason was it's going to be the world's fastest 3-and-outs. And I still think that a lot of the time that's what it's going to be. Who are the receivers on this team? And it blows my mind that they scored 28 points while almost entirely ignoring Torrey Smith. Doing the projections, the Kubiak for this year, it was just like we just had to keep giving Torrey Smith yards because where else is it going? And the answer is apparently it's going into scrambles and read option plays. But, when if the offense plays the way we expect, it is going to be the fastest 3-and-outs ever. It's not going to help them. But if they play all they have to do is play like average, which a bad offense can do some of the time. And then I do think that the pace kicks in and becomes a really valuable part of what they do. And I think it was a really valuable part of that first game.
Okay, then let's pivot to talk about Chip Kelly's old team, the Eagles, who, again, they also won commandingly in Week 1, and they did so against the Browns, who, even compared to the Rams, are really bad. They are 32nd in DVOA and 32nd in Dave after Week 1. And I didn't look this up, but I imagine they were 32nd or maybe 31st in the preseason DVOA projections. But what are your thoughts on what Carson Wentz did? It's still a rookie playing his first game. That's still a tough ask, even against a bad team. Did he seem impressive to you, and what did the advanced stats say?
Well, I will admit to not having watched this game. I mean, this is, one of the things about, you can't watch every game, and I haven't had a chance to watch it on film yet, and I'm not sure if I will because I'm dealing with other things this week. But certainly the numbers were impressive. Before opponent adjustments, he was 9th in DYAR among quarterbacks, and part of the reason for that is a rushing fumble that I think is like a botched exchange and not the kind of thing that you can expect to happen a lot. So I think it was a nice, promising start, and don't go expecting him to be rookie Russell Wilson or rookie Andrew Luck off of this. But it was a nice start, and it certainly looked good and makes you wonder, why don't the Rams just put Jared Goff out there and figure out what they have?
Sure.
Because
we may be 2 weeks
might as well
that,
just start, because Carson Wentz was like hardly played in the preseason and was actually worse in the preseason than Jared Goff was. And then he went out and he's fine, and he looks like a professional quarterback.
So I wanted to do a little bit of a comparison here because I thought Wentz looked impressive. We mentioned that Garoppolo was a little impressive. And even Trevor Siemian, even though his numbers weren't that good because of some interceptions on Thursday, I thought he looked very composed during that entire game. So
that word was used so much, though. That word was so overused on the broadcast about how poised Trevor Siemian.
I don't mean to be a parrot.
It's not like you just pulled the guy out of high school, right? I mean, he's had an entire year of being in the National Football League. So he is somewhat poised. And he certainly looked better than he would look if I said to you, 7th-round pick who threw more interceptions than touchdowns in his last college year, you wouldn't expect him to look that good.
So maybe we're grading on a curve.
He looked like he should be a starter in the NFL. He looked to me like a guy who's going to have a very long career as a backup.
Okay.
If he can not make as many bad mistakes, which I think with experience will happen, I think he can be a useful backup for a long time. But he doesn't. I mean, he had a couple that he really did get it into short, tight windows, and that is pretty. And you like that. But there's like no deep passes there at all.
True.
And there are some bad decisions, rookie decisions or whatever you call it. Second year, had never played before, equivalent of rookie decisions. So I'm not thinking of him as that he's all of a sudden some kind of star. I do think he could be better than what they got out of Peyton Manning last year, and certainly better than what you would think they would get out of a 7th-rounder who was terrible in college, especially when you consider the defense that he did it against.
That's fair. In your mind, just based on what you saw and what the numbers think, what about Garoppolo? Is he the kind of guy that you think can be a starter-quality player? It might have to be for another team if Brady continues to play for several more seasons, but does he have that sort of potential?
He came out about average. among this week's quarterbacks in performance, and I think that means he's a bit above average once you correct for playing the Arizona defense. But I think you may need to then correct backwards for Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels game planning for him instead of random other offensive coordinator. So what I said about Garoppolo in an ESPN Insider question and answer thing that I did this week was that I think he's probably better than Ryan Mallett or Brian Hoyer, and probably is about what Matt Castle was in the first couple years he was in Kansas City when he was a reasonable starter. I think if you have one of the bottom 10 starting quarterbacks in the league, Garoppolo is an upgrade, but otherwise he's just going to be a pretty good backup.
Okay, great. Let's do one more question then about the Eagles. And again, this is week one and we overreact and that's what we do. But could the Eagles be competitive in the NFC East given if Wentz is maybe a successful, moderately good first-year quarterback? I think in the DVOA projections, the Eagles' defense was projected to finish 26th this season, but I think my memory is right in that they were top 10 for a while last year in the middle of the season. And again, this pace of play issue could have been a contributing factor to them sort of falling apart later in the year. Do you think that they would potentially have a chance? And again, that's also probably asking, are the other teams in the East maybe not good enough to run away from a team like the Eagles?
Okay, so first of all, yes, the latter. The NFC East does not look like it's good enough to run away from the Eagles. We did look back at the first couple years with Chip Kelly, and there was no evidence of that trend of the defense getting tired at the end of the season. So that was just a thing last week. And I apologize for the motorcycle guy outside my window.
It adds a good gritty character to the podcast.
It's finally mid-70s, and I can enjoy having an open window, so I hope you will all bear with me out there in podcast land.
Completely worth it.
So what happened to the Eagles' defense last year was really strange, because they were definitely rated a lot better than you would expect, given past performance and the current talent on that team for the first half of the year. And then they collapsed in an absurd way. And I think, you kind of expect that this year would be somewhere halfway in between, but there were some personnel questions. But at the same time, subjectively, I think that there is some thought that perhaps their personnel fits what Jim Schwartz wants to do better than the 3-4 that they played last year. So, it's a lot of, the whole NFC East is a lot of meh, where the team that wins the division is going to be the team that turns out to be good instead of meh.
Right.
Right? I mean, one of these teams is going to end up being good instead of and whichever team that is the team that's going to win the division. Now, I think it's more likely that team's going to be the New York Giants, but it could be the Eagles. It could even be Washington, who I've been like the leader of the Washington is not as good as you think bandwagon all offseason. But it's like the AFC South, it is a bad toss-up division with arguments for each team. The difference is that, at least with the AFC South, the teams, there's a couple of them that look like mediocrity building towards something, or mediocrity building towards something as soon as they get rid of the terrible head coach that they hired for some reason that the Fritz Pollard Alliance didn't talk to them enough. But the NFC East is more older players, I think, but obviously young quarterback with Wentz, and if Prescott really is the sort of heir apparent to Romo.
Well, I have no doubt that we'll be circling back to the East and the AFC South in future weeks. But we want to move on to one last topic before we call today a full episode, and it's one near and dear to my heart because it's located in the NFC South, where quarterback Jameis Winston had a very impressive day, at least from a fantasy perspective, by throwing 4 touchdowns and picking up 281 yards against the Falcons. So I wanted to get your thoughts. Like, Winston is a guy that obviously is a logical candidate to be a second-year jump guy, and if he becomes a really good quarterback, then chances are the Bucs will be a really good team. That's how the NFL tends to work. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on what to make of his Week 1 performance. How much of his success was related to the Falcons' poor defense, and anything else that you have on Winston and your thoughts?
Well, I will say that even after you account for the quality of the Atlanta defense, and it does not look good, and it hasn't been good for a couple of years, and I doubt it's going to end up good this year, when you put in the opponent adjustments, there's going to be an adjustment here. But that doesn't make Winston's day look average.
Right.
It was a good day, okay? It was not a great day. It was a good day. The interesting thing about the Falcons' defense is that they have one player who's so much better than everyone else on the defense, and the way that affects things is odd. Like last year, for some reason, Desmond Trufant, he is the best player on that defense. Eyeballs show that to pretty much anyone who knows football, but the charting stats actually gave better stats to Robert Alford, who played across from him. And I didn't have a chance to go back and look, but it's got to be some kind of a weird like safety coverage thing that made us chart it that way because Alford was not very good in 2014, and Trufant is clearly the guy everyone respects. And then I think when you look at the numbers from this game for Winston, you see the effect of Trufant. So on Trufant's side of the field, okay, which is the offensive right, Winston was 5 for 10, 34 yards, and an interception to wide receivers. Wide receivers on the other side of the field, or in the middle, 5 for 9, 151 yards. And to running backs and tight ends, 13 for 15 for 155 yards. So I wonder if this is going to be the case against the Falcons. If I remember correctly from writing up the book, the Falcons were the only defense in the league last year where opponents threw more to their running backs and tight ends than to their wide receivers.
Interesting.
And we saw the same kind of trend this week, where it's like maybe the guys playing across, maybe Alfred's not as bad as his reputation, but the safeties and the linebackers are. So it's like not just avoid Trufant, but let's just not throw to our wide receivers at all. Let's just throw to our running backs and tight ends. And Evans and Jackson had some good catches on Alford, but mostly a lot of the offense here was like Cameron Brate and Charles Sims. And I wonder if that's going to be the case all year when you play Atlanta.
Interesting. Okay, beyond just the question of whether the Bucs might be a good team or not if Winston becomes a better team, I have a question about your playoff odds and how the fact that the Buccaneers got a win, so they have a win in the bank, and the Panthers lost a tough game in Denver, so they have a loss in the bank. How much do those actual results move the needle on the NFC South division?
By the way, the fun thing for us is my Patriots won but had the lower DVOA. Your Panthers lost and had the higher DVOA.
Yeah, fun is one word for that, Aaron. There might be another.
The good news I can tell you is this is a classic line of mine. Well, classic to me, because I say it all the time. If you have to lose a game, the best loss you can have is on the road against a team from the other conference.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. It's
right?
not.
If you're going to pick a loss, that's the loss you want. Now, look, part of our playoff odds is the preseason projections are still 90% of the rating. And, of course, we know that our preseason projections had Carolina lower than most people would have them, but still was the best team in this division.
Right.
That being said, the one win for Tampa Bay changes things a lot because the rest of the division went 0-1, not just Carolina. So the Dave rating for Carolina is still 8 percentage points ahead of Tampa Bay. But because of that one win, the two teams are tied in average wins in simulations at 8.2. The Panthers are slightly ahead in playoff odds, and it looks a little weird on the website because if you go to the playoff odds page on Outsiders, it's actually ordered by mean wins, not by playoff odds, and therefore because Tampa Bay is like decimal point mean wins ahead of Carolina, they're listed on top, even though Carolina has slightly better playoff odds. It's not that Carolina's playoff odds went down much according to our calculations. They only went down about 5% because it wasn't a game you would have expected them to win on the road against a good, not great team, according to our numbers, but on the road. But Tampa Bay's went up 15% more than anyone else this week. So it was more a good week for Tampa than it was a bad week for Carolina. A good week for Tampa and a bad week for New Orleans and Atlanta because Carolina is still pretty good and Tampa Bay won and they didn't win.
Exactly. All right, I think that's a wrap on this episode. So I want to remind everyone, again, check out footballoutsiders.com. Check out those new premium charting subscriptions and the new weekly fantasy football projections. Aaron, anything cool you're looking forward to in week 2?
Well, I mean, a lot of good games, and hopefully nobody who's colorblind goes crazy. With
the color
rush uniforms are like the worst thing on the planet. I will be at Gillette for the first time this year to watch the Garoppolo versus Miami show, and I plan to spend the game watching Mario Williams to figure out just what is that guy's deal. I think Indy-Denver is going to be a really good game. Cincinnati-Pittsburgh is always good, although I won't be watching it because I'll be at Gillette. And Monday night's game is kind of lame. Sorry, it is. Sorry, ESPN people. I don't know how many people really... I mean, Chicago Bears just don't seem like an exciting team for anybody who's not a Chicago Bears fan right now. Like, what excites you about that team? Like, Alshon Jeffrey a little bit? Okay, yeah, but, like, what else is exciting about the Chicago Bears right now other than Alshon Jeffrey if you're not a Chicago Bears fan?
I mean, probably not that much, but I bet that's still not going to prevent people from watching the game because the worst football game is better.
They may have taken over the title of the most boring team in the league. Given that Jacksonville has all the hot young defensive players now, and Robinson and stuff, and Tennessee at least has the we're trying to be exotic smash mouth thing going on. Chicago may have taken over the title of most boring team in the league.
I'm going to have to put some thought into that. We can talk about that and anything else interesting that happens next week, Aaron. So thanks so much for everyone who listened to this episode. Again, we're back on our weekly schedules, so you can check us out probably every Thursday the rest of the way. Have a great week, too, and we'll see you next week.